So we're going to talk about attachment injury wounds and attachment injuries slash wounds, same thing, different word. Um, and, you know, just to put this out there, trying to deal with these old wounds that you have, which we'll talk about what those are, in negative cycles is going to make them worse. And when we can start talking about these things in positive cycles, consistently and over the course of time, that's how we start to heal. And of course, we have to have behavior change too. And I'll talk more about that. So, what is an attachment injury or wound? Well, it's just a profound betrayal of trust that actually blocks any good moments from landing, right? It's hard to take in the good because you have this kind of lingering mistrust. And if it's not healed, your body's sort of always wondering when it's going to come back and happen again. That's the problem, is you don't know when it's going to happen again. Or you have, unresolved feelings that need space to be processed, even if you do know it's not going to happen again. Until those feelings are fully processed, you don't know if something bad is going to happen again. It could be one event. For the biggest example, the most common example of an attachment wound is an affair, right? And it could be that, or it could be multiple events, like a substance abuse problem where one partner, there's just been so many episodes that have, involved the substance that have been super damaging. And one in and of itself isn't so much of a problem, but the fact that they have happened, so many of them have happened, is a problem. Or just sometimes chronic events of things that don't seem such a big deal in the moment. They're not like these crazy big dramatic, obvious events, maybe just like chronic lying, little lies, or chronic subtle verbal abuse, gone on over the course of time and unrepaired is enough to create a wound. These attachment wounds, they kind of hover in the background if they're not healed, and they just continue to show up in present day moments. That's how we know they're there. They just keep showing up even when they're not actively happening. So your partner had an affair and they're going to a dinner after work. The affair happened 4 years ago, but they're going to dinner and all of a sudden you're triggered, right? You are triggered because you don't know who's going to be at that dinner. And we know they're there if there's a feeling that you're never entirely safe. Now, if you're never entirely safe, that doesn't mean there's been a wound. It could be all sorts of reasons, but that's one way wounds will show up, is that you never get to fully relax. Or you don't get to fully relax consistently. Maybe sometimes you do, but enough of the time you don't that it's a problem. Okay, so the first thing that has to happen is we have to accept that there actually has been an injury, and we need to name it, because you can't heal it if you can't really explicitly name it. And both partners really need to agree that this wound has happened, and they need to be able to see it clearly for what it is and as a wound. That doesn't mean that it intentionally happened, right? A lot of times people do these behaviors without the intention of hurting their partner, and they're not going to own a wound. Or I'm sorry, if you believe that you have to have intentionally hurt your partner to have created a wound, then it's very difficult to, own that wound, right? So there doesn't have to be intentionality there. And both partners almost always together, not always, but almost always, contribute to the fact that the wound was created. Right. So, for example, that a toxic environment in the relationship that both partners are contributing to, but one partner chooses to respond to that toxic environment with an affair, right? The most toxic environment, the worst partner in the world can't make someone have an affair. However, we also have to address the toxic environment. So even if both partners contribute, the wound is still real and it still needs to heal, and it needs to be healed separately from the conversation about the wounded partner's contribution, right? So we can say, okay, the wounded partner was awful and they were doing all this bad stuff. And that kind of created this problem that one partner chose to have an affair. And we do need to talk about both of those. But we're not going to do that while we're talking about how the wounded partner was wounded. We got to separate all of that out. Um, of course, the wounding behavior has to end, right? There's no amount of safe conversation that is going to heal if the wound is just ongoing. That's obvious, to most people. If the behavior can't stop, the wound's just going to keep getting reopened. And no amount of healing conversation is going to help. In rare cases, the behavior change isn't the actual behavior. It's a new way of seeing and talking about the behavior. And this means, for example, like let's say one partner has a really demanding job and it causes them to have to be late all the time or be not so predictable about I'm going to be home at this time or I'm going to be able to make it to this event at this time, right? Ideally, in an ideal world, that behavior stops and, it doesn't keep creating a problem. But there are situations in life and seasons of life where maybe the consequences of not being late would be so devastating to a partner's, to that person's job or their financial status or whatever, that it just has to be like that for now. Okay. So sometimes we have to keep the behavior going for whatever good reason. But the healing is going to be in a new way of talking about the behavior. They're no longer going into those places of you never show up for me. You're always lying about when you're going to be home. And the other person going, you should be more appreciative. You don't like that I'm late, but you sure like that nice new car on the driveway. That's not going to work. We have to be able to say, hey, I know this sucks for both of us. It's hard, right? And I get how hard it is for you when I'm not being able to be at home, when I say I will or whatever. And, they're kind of working together on it with both recognizing that sometimes in this season of life, it just has to be like this. Same thing with like a chronic illness. We can't necessarily change just because that chronic illness isn't anything anybody signed up for voluntarily. It can still cause a wound. It can cause a wound if one partner is feeling let down over and over and over again. The healing can't come from solving the chronic illness if that's not possible. So we have to learn new ways to talk about the chronic illness in a way that doesn't be dismissive of anybody's feelings around it. There does need to be an apology and a commitment to change around these behaviors, but the healing process doesn't end there. We need more than an apology and commitment to change. All right, so healing conversations, they are safe, they're clear. The wounded partner gives a self-focused delivery. They're not just going into, you're so awful, you're a selfish person, you're flawed, this is why you did this, and how could you have? I mean, there could be a lot of truth to those statements, but that isn't going to help that other person feel heard. What will help increase the odds that the wounding partner will feel heard is just really sticking with, this is how I was impacted, right? When I looked at that text message and it felt like the floor just dropped out from under me and my sense of safety in the world was destroyed. And I really need for you to know how much I was hurting in that moment. Not just that moment, lots of other moments, but I need for you to know how devastating this was for me, right? And then the response from the wounding partner really needs to be understanding and validating instead of taking the mic and going into their own stuff. So instead of just kind of leaving it at, I'm so sorry I put you through that, which can be an important thing to say, right? We don't want to lead with that. We want to lead with something that is showing I'm leaning into how you felt. I'm getting it. I'm empathizing with you, because empathy is a better motivator than fear. So we need empathy. A person is going to be far more motivated not to keep hurting their partner if they can actually feel empathy. So that might sound like, I'm allowing myself to feel into what you're saying. And I'm never going to know exactly how you felt in that moment, but my body knows how it feels to be hurt too. I've been hurt in life, and it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And your hurt makes so much sense to me, and I just want to lean into it with you right now. That coming from an authentic place is very powerful when people can get to the place that they can do that. And it takes work on both sides to be able to know those words and feel into those words. How many times do we need to keep talking about the same thing again and again and again? Well, that's frustrating. I know it's not always, you know, um, it's not always pleasant to imagine that you have to keep talking about the same thing over and over again, right? But the goal isn't to keep talking about it over and over again. The goal is to talk about it effectively as many times as needed. So you work yourself out of a job. So you stop having to talk about it over and over again. And if the same issue keeps popping up indefinitely for years and years and years, or months and months and months, that doesn't mean that you're just going to have to keep talking about it indefinitely. That means that it's not getting talked about in a way that's actually helping it heal. So the idea here is that if we start to get momentum on healing conversations, the wound will start to heal. And when wounds are healed, they don't get triggered over and over again, or they get triggered much less often. So we're creating an environment where they're not there to be triggered, not forcing them to not be triggered. Wounds do have their own timeline for healing, but the quality of the conversation facilitates that. That's what creates the right environment. We can't rush it, but we can create the right environment. And let's just say conversations are going as perfectly as possible, but the wound is still not being healed, and it just keeps getting triggered and keeps circling back to it again and again, and it doesn't seem like there's been any progress. That means that there's some sort of block that healing, that needs to be uncovered for the healing process to fully work. And that goes, beyond the extent of this chapter, because there could be all kinds of blocks, and sometimes it might take professional help, for a professional to help come in and kind of try to figure out, what these blocks are and how we can work through them. Again, there's the problem in, if the end game is to heal the wound, and we go a step backward from that, and we say, well, to heal that wound, we have to have healing conversations and behavior change. Then to go a step back from that, we have to not be in negative cycles when we have the healing conversations. They're not healing if we're in negative cycles, right? So if you are going into negative cycles while you try to repair, you are ensuring that the wound will stay unhealed, and you're also maybe even making it worse, because if someone is traumatized by an event or a situation, and then they're trying to talk about that situation and they're just getting met with invalidation and all these things, that can re-traumatize, right? And make it even worse. So if someone's relationship isn't good at staying out of negative cycles around like events that or situations or triggers that aren't as emotionally impactful as the wound, then we can reasonably, confidently assume that they need to learn some skills before they try to heal the wound. Because if we can't talk about smaller issues, usually no issue is small if it's causing a fight, but if we can't talk about those things without going into a negative cycle, we're setting ourselves up for failure if we try to keep talking about this wound. So sometimes, and nobody likes to hear this, sometimes we have to put the wound on the back burner while we just learn better communication skills. Or we at least need to be ready when we start having the conversation about the wound. We need to be ready to back away from it once we start going into a negative cycle. So people will say to me, when do we get to talk about this horrible wound when we come to therapy? And what I've learned to say is, we'll start talking about it right now. We'll start right now. Let's go. Let's start talking about it. But the second you guys start to go into a negative cycle, I'm going to have to pull us out of that and figure out why we're going into the negative cycle. Because if we keep trying to push through, we're going to make things worse. And, we can't put wounds on the back burner indefinitely. It's just a tourniquet. Sometimes we need to put a tourniquet on them to be able to learn better skills so we can actually be successful in talking about it. Um, Douglas asks a good question. Is the attachment wound what you bring to a relationship from your childhood, or how is it playing out in an adult relationship now, or both? Well, I'm specifically talking about wounds that partners create together, right? But the wounds that they create together are heavily impacted by each partner's childhood experiences. It's going to heavily impact the creation of the wound. It's going to heavily impact the creation of the environment that set the stage for a wound, and it's going to heavily impact how they repair from the wound. So we can't ever completely separate the two, but I am specifically talking about wounds that were created between partners. All right. So what can the wounded partner, what might they be doing in negative cycles that are blocking the healing? Well, getting stuck in anger, right? And expressing anger is super important. And it's super important that the wounded partner is able to hold that anger. But the idea is getting through it, not getting stuck in it. Getting stuck in it is counterproductive. And if it's stuck, that is going to make it difficult to heal from the wound. And both partners can play a role in anger being stuck. Um, Staying in protest and blame and shaming and attacks as a way to communicate your feelings without, well, just that in and of itself is not helpful. It's not really going to help anybody hear you, and it's not really going to address any problem. And it's really not talking about your feelings or being showing up with healthy assertion, right? We need the two broad categories of healthy communication are vulnerability and healthy assertion. I'm not okay with that, and here's why. And I have to stand up for that. That's healthy assertion. This is not. This is the opposite of both of those things. We do need at some point the wounded partner to attempt to understand where the wounding partner was coming from. We're not excusing their behavior, but this person does matter too, and we at least need to be able at some point to to step into their world also. That will block wound healing if we're not, and we'll talk more about what the space looks like for the wounding partner. If a partner that is wounded isn't able, let's say their partner is showing up in a new way and they are learning to communicate about it in a new way. And if the wounded partner can't take that in, I need to understand why. I know there's a good reason they can't take it in, right? And I want to figure what that is so I can work through it. But we also need to recognize there's a consequence here, because if our partner's showing up in the best way possible and really over there doing the work, and we're not taking it in, we're not giving them any success with the new work, and they're just going to end up demoralized. And maybe that doesn't mean that they don't have to hang in there for a while and see it take effect. But if it stays like that indefinitely, people stop trying if what they're trying isn't getting them anywhere. And that's just normal. Um, what can the wounding partner do to get in the way? Well, making excuses. And especially this is true in the moment where the wounded partner has the mic, where our goal in this conversation is to deal with their hurt and their feelings. So if the wounding partner takes that as an opportunity to start making excuses or going into their own shame or changing the subject, well, you did this, or, just having poor timing in any way, or trying to speed up the process. Yeah, I know you felt like that. Okay, fine. Let's just, get through it. Or if they're unable to sit with their own feelings and triggers around their partner's sharing, they might have guilt and remorse come up. They might have sadness come up, or anger or resentment or fear. If they're not able to kind of put that stuff over here for a bit, we'll get back to it, and truly lean into their partner's hurt, then we're not going to be able to get anywhere, right? So this stuff does need space, but we have to do it with the right timing. And if there's been some big wound, this partner gets the floor first. That's what we deal with first. Okay, so we also want to ask, what is your work, partner? what is our work together and what is my work? Because there is self-work to healing wounds, even if you're the wounded partner. For one, being able to communicate your feelings effectively. So your work as the wounded partner, I'm sorry, that when you're, let's say the wounded partner is speaking here. So their partner's work, your work partner, is to change your behavior, is to understand the root cause of why you dealt with your feelings in this way, to learn to better manage your feelings so you don't keep doing these bad behaviors, and to actively participate in healing conversations, doing your part. Okay. Our work together, we're going to have to work together here to stay out of negative cycles and be safer with each other. And we're both going to have to take ownership for the way that we have contributed to this problem, maybe together, maybe not, but we do need to take a look at it. And if we do both have contributions, we both need to take ownership of that. My work is to, own my contribution, if there is one, to change my own behavior that might be contributing to an unhealthy environment, to recognize the unhealed self wounds, which might be blocking healing. Sometimes there's self wounds here that are layered under the actual relationship wounds that can block healing, even for the wounded partner, that need to be addressed. And then the wounded partner also needs to actively participate in healing conversations. All right, what about making space for the wounding partner? At some point, that needs to happen too. Just because one person has a wound doesn't mean the other person's needs and feelings just go to the wayside, right? Even the worst wounding partner out there probably has some of their own wounds, maybe not, but still their feelings need some space, right? Their wounds need some attention too. Now, if they've done something really awful or have really behaved badly, there's some truth to the fact that they might need to have that stuff on the back burner for a while we focus on this bigger energy and we create more safety and trust in the relationship. Sometimes that will need to happen. But in the context of proper timing, right? Again, it's about timing. It's not about whose needs matter more. It's about when are we going to give the attention to each person's needs. So in the context of getting the timing right, the wounding partner does need some space to share about their motivations around it or their feelings of shame, right? We just don't want them to use their partner's share time as an opportunity to take the mic and go into their own stuff. And sometimes we need to give it some time because the wounded partner is not ready to show up for the wounding partner yet. And understandably, they've been traumatized. Like we have to do this, in a safe way. And sometimes we have to give them a lot of time and a lot of new experiences in the relationship before they're going to be ready to show up. But that doesn't mean it's okay for them to never show up. We need for them to be able to show up at some point. Some injuries are truly worse than others, right? It's, far more damaging to have an affair than it is to, just call your partner a name. Okay. They're both damaging, but one of them is probably going to create a lot more sense of betrayal and mistrust than the other. Some behaviors are truly objectively more damaging, but still each partner's injury, if both partners have injuries, does need to be given space. It really gets tricky when couples start to compete with injuries. Well, you did this. Well, I felt like that. Well, I felt like that. Well, you did this. We can't do that. It's going to block healing of all of it. And we really need to avoid this thing of who gets to hurt worse. And there is truth to the fact that maybe someone does hurt worse, but we can't go back and forth competing in one conversation around that. It gets convoluted. Everybody gets confused. We're not fully addressing any one thing. All right. How do you know if the wound is healing? Well, for one, the wound stops getting triggered so often. It's not coming up as much. It's not taking up so much energy. maybe it still is, but it's lessening. And again, this can be a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. Sometimes we have a couple weeks go by where it shows up more than others, but then we notice we're having longer stretches where it's not so big. The conversations around it start to shift into more of a place of connection. We're able to kind of bring it up when it gets triggered, and we end up feeling kind of heard and understood and a little more connected than in a worse place because we went into a negative cycle. Again, you'll notice it doesn't get brought up as often. Often when I'm working with a wound, there's no point at which we're going, okay, the wound is healed. It just stops coming up in the sessions. It starts to become irrelevant. It's like you're not going to talk about if you cut your arm really badly and it's healing, and if it's still in pain because it's still, actively trying to heal. You're going to notice it all the time, but you're not going to notice the wound when it's healed and go, oh, look, the wound isn't there. It's not there. It's not there. You're just not going to be focused on your arm as much. And then when it does get brought up, it can be stabilized so much more quickly. This is one of those moments where I kind of have that stuff coming back up. Can you just, give me some reassurance or validate that? Yes, I know it's so hard for you. When we're in this part of town, this bad stuff happened. I totally get why this would be triggering for you. How can I help you right now? Done. If they've done all the background work, it can be stabilized that quickly. Instead of, why do you always have to bring this up? Look, we can't avoid this. We can't completely avoid this part of town, or the wounded partner shutting down and not talking because they got into the part of town and all the anger comes back up to find them. That just means there's so much stuff that needs to get attention and be addressed. So it doesn't just keep coming up in these ways that blindside the couple. All right, we are done with that. So now we'll go into answering some questions. Okay. Yeah, Douglas, I'll probably still be here if you have a question. Um, my partner is slightly on the spectrum and has trouble with empathy, what to do. I think the number one the most important piece of empathy is being able to access one's own feelings. So we need for your partner to get in touch with their own bad feelings so that they can start to relate more to yours. And everybody has bad feelings somewhere in there. So, one way to do that is to get therapy and have a therapist help you start to kind of access your own feelings and be able to name them and be able to put words to them. Another way is you can try to help your partner with that. I would probably start with, what's it like to, hear that you don't have empathy? What is that like? What happens for you when you think, wow, I don't have any empathy, or wow, my partner thinks I don't have empathy? That must be pretty hard to be accused of that or to have to experience that. And see if you can get them talking about what it's like, just this whole conversation around them not having empathy. You might find that they feel bad about that. You might find there's shame around that. You might find there's sadness around that, or a sense of overwhelm, or a sense of failure around that. And if you can get words to that, now you have them engaging with themselves, and it's going to be far easier for them to see some of those feelings in you too. I was telling this story earlier today when I was talking to my therapist, and my therapists that are on my staff. And I said, one of the most powerful experiences I've had as a therapist many years ago is I had this guy come in, and he was a surgeon, and he was, you just couldn't paint a more accurate picture of someone on the spectrum. And, his job was to push his feelings down and be technical. And he'd been told his whole life that he had autism, and his wife always complained at him for having autism, and maybe he did. But, in maybe 15, 30 minutes of working with him in that session, he was in tears. And it was the first time that he'd cried since he was 10 years old. And the reason he was in tears is because of how painful it's been for him his whole life to be told that he's just this unfeeling robot. And it turns out he wasn't an unfeeling robot. Maybe he did have, he wasn't diagnosed as autistic, but maybe he did have autism. Maybe he was on the spectrum, but he still had feelings in there. He just needed some help finding them. Okay, it looks like we have some um, questions. SG, do you have a question? Looks like you have your hand up. From my end, it looks like you have your hand up. Okay, if you're coming on, go ahead and come on. Oh, there you are. I was going to say I'll go to another question while you get ready, but it looks like you're here.
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Um, so I'm in a anxious avoidant relationship. We've been in a relationship for a long time.
Okay.
I am the one who is aware of this type of thing, attachment, woundings, and repair and stuff like that. One of the main issues that I have in trying to repair my relationship is I've been wounded. My partner lied in a big way. And we've tried to have a conversation about it. He is avoidant and seems to want to just dismiss that he has created a very big wound. He would rather not talk about it. I'm trying to understand a healthy way to go about repairing that. Like, what is a healthy expectation of regaining trust? I'm thinking transparency. He gets upset and just says, if you're going to hold this above my head, I can't be in a relationship with you. I'm thinking that just means he doesn't want to repair it. He doesn't know how, or he just likes continuing to lie. I'd
Mhm.
like to repair it.
Well, first of all, is he open to information? If he doesn't have the skill to go through a repair, then there's no way to repair. So he's got to be open to learning the skills to have a successful repair. So the first thing I would want to know is he willing to access that information and work with you? And if
I
not,
think we are, yes, I think I'm open to it more. I'm the one who's doing research. He is open to it, but I think he uses that he works too much as like an excuse. He seems to use
hmm,
excuses.
okay,
We both actually follow your page on Facebook.
okay.
He'll share things with me that you post, but when this big wound comes up, it seems to be something he wants to avoid.
Okay, so he needs some buy-in because the reality is this. It's going to take a lot less time to heal the wound and not have to deal with it over and over again than it is to have it keep coming up indefinitely over the
Mm-hmm.
years. So we need to get some buy-in from him. So I would start with just really validating that, he doesn't want to go into this and kind of understanding why, because what's the fear there? Is the fear that you'll just talk about it indefinitely, that the healing process for him seems like it might just be talking about the wound forever and ever and ever. And that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, would want to make anyone not want to go down that road, right?
Right.
We
Right.
don't agree with that, but so I would want to know more about, you said, does he just want to keep lying? Maybe he does. Maybe, you know, let's just name it. Like, what is the lying doing for him that's somehow keeping him safe that it's hard for him to let go of that? Um, I know
Right.
that's a
I'm
hard,
thinking it's a childhood wound, and we've tried to discuss that. I ask him, I'm thinking it's like he needed to lie to his parents over and over
yeah.
and over again to avoid
Okay.
either getting in trouble or something.
Then I would
Um,
say to him, maybe it's just, you had to learn to lie growing up, right? And so it makes sense to me that somehow you're trying to stay safe here by lying to. It's not working, but like I'm just trying to kind of validate why you would be resistant to this information. Then when you can kind of get him feeling safe, like he's not just being judged or told he's all wrong or whatever, then we need to share, okay, but there's still a consequence, right? There's still a consequence of this
yes.
wound not being healed. We need to really if you don't want to heal it, we'll figure some like, okay, I don't know what we'll do, but we need to at least be clear about the consequences. What's the consequence on you of not healing this? Well, the consequence on you is it's not going to go away. You're going to have to keep dealing with it over and over. The consequence on me is I'm going to not feel close. I'm not going to feel really safe because, I can't as long as this thing is lingering. And then the consequence on the relationship is we're probably just going to keep fighting. It's going
Mm-hmm.
to keep showing up. And so I just really need for you to see that there's a lot of good reasons for not wanting to go down that road, but there's also consequences to not doing so. And so
Yes.
maybe would you be willing to try this and let's just see what happens? At least be open to the information.
Right. Where do I learn what is healthy expectations as far as healing a trust wound? I'm thinking it's transparency, you know, but I'm not quite sure where the line is as far as what's healthy. I'm think the lie was around he got out of work without telling me. He did this activity that was a huge lie. Showed up at my
Okay.
house the next day, totally lied, and it finally just came to the head. So now I have a huge wound of where are you? What are you doing? Are
The
you keeping more
expectation is
secrets?
that he will be able to lean into what you just said, really hear you, not go into his own stuff, really try to understand how that impacted you. He may have not done it intentionally. It doesn't matter. He just needs to be with you and how that impacted you. He really needs to be able to say, I hear you. I get it.
Hmm.
That was really hard for you. I'm sorry for my role in that. And I'm really understanding that. And of course, you're upset if that's the experience you had. Of course, that would be really hard. That's expectation number one. That is an absolutely reasonable and appropriate expectation, right?
Yes.
And then the second one is that, he's willing to work with you somehow on that not happening again. You might have work to do around that too. I don't know, but there's some attempt at let's kind of figure out how we can work together on not letting that happen again. And then he might later have something to say too, you know, about your role in that. I don't know what that might be, but the first thing that is absolutely a, a, a healthy expectation is for him just to lean into your experience. And if that doesn't happen, it is going to be difficult for your nervous system to feel safe and close.
Hmm.
So it's not like, I just have this demand because I'm just randomly want you to wallow in shame and feel bad about yourself. It's, I want to feel safe and close to you. But to be able to do that, I need to be able to reach you with these moments when we kind of, fall off and I feel hurt.
Yes. I
So,
think he seems to be affected by the avoidant shame. He
right,
doesn't want to be reminded that he has caused me pain. I'm the one
right.
who, I'm the anxious one, right? I want to work through the problems. Totally open to, okay, what is my part in this? I don't think there was, because this was a total lie on his part.
Yeah.
um,
All
I
right.
don't,
Well, try to just, the starting point is we're gonna because you can't help him put the shame to the side without him knowing the process of healing and that the shame.
mhm,
So step one here is trying to get his buy-in to at least learning how to do this. That's step one.
right.
Okay. Thank you. Let me unpin here. Oh, wait, you're not pinned. Okay. Let's see. What do you suggest to do so we can stop pointing the finger and blaming each other? Well, when you say pointing the finger and blaming each other, what you're really saying is, what can we do to feel heard, right? What can we do? Because when I try to tell my partner, what they're getting wrong, so they'll change and we won't have to keep getting hurt over and over again. We won't have to keep circling back to the same place. Then what happens is when I'm over there doing that, then they start doing the same to me. And the next thing you know, I'm pointing the finger and blaming them, and they're pointing the finger and blaming me. Okay, so first of all, we need to make some timing boundaries around this. One person gets the floor at a time to talk about whatever it is that they're trying to talk about with the blame and finger pointing. So we need structure around when we're going to bring these to each other. So when we pick who has the floor, okay, and with that, there's an understanding that the other person will also get the floor in the future. And we stay with that person's experience, right? We really lean into what are you really trying to say? What are you needing with this finger pointing and blame? And we need to not finger point and blame in that space. Instead of you did this, you did that, like trying to get them to see what they did wrong so they'll change. Of course you want them to change, right? But I just need you to shift the way you're communicating and instead talk more about your vulnerable feelings. This happened. And, when you did this thing, here's how I was impacted by that. It really hurt me. It really starts to make me feel, kind of like, can I really, do you really care about my needs over here? And, are you willing to kind of work with me on this? Are we actually a team? And if I don't feel like we're a team, that's a bad, bad place for me. And then you might need to move into healthy assertion, which is, I need for this to change really, truly, because I can't feel fully safe and close. And that's going to impact us in all these ways. So I'm really needing for this change to be made. That's very different from you this, you that, you this, you that, you're the problem. Okay. And that person, the hearing partner in that situation, their role is to lean in and really try to stay with you in that instead of going into their own stuff. And then later, hours later, not right away. I don't suggest right away switching because what happens if you do it right away, it just starts to feel like, you're just biding your time until it's your turn. So we want to sit with one person's perspective for a while, for hours, and then we reverse and kind of go back in and do it with the other person. 40 years of marriage, wounding is relational, emotional neglect over those years. We are working with an EFT coach, but the trust is just not there for me. My partner has often said he was on the same page about something, but later I realized we were never on the same page, big things and small things. Is there a point when things cannot be safe enough to keep going with the work? That is where I am right now after a few months of sessions. Well, there definitely is a point at which the work will no longer, will not be effective, right? And that point is when one partner decides that they're not willing to do vulnerability anymore, right? And so when you say the trust is just not there for me, what you're saying is I don't have trust, so I'm not really able or willing, either way, to be open to what my partner is bringing to me. And I'm not willing or able to be vulnerable anymore because I don't trust it will be held. Okay. So I need to unpack, as the therapist, I need to unpack the root of that mistrust, why that mistrust is there, how it's showing up. Again, usually mistrust is showing up as a difficulty or a willingness with vulnerability, a lack of safety around that. We can't make the relationship work if we don't have clear back and forth vulnerability taking place. And so I need to figure out the root cause of that. Is there something that their partner can do differently to help you build trust? Or is it just the wounds were so big, I was so shattered that I checked out and I don't want to go back into that, right? If that's the case and there's really nothing that they can do then to help you get back into safety with them, then there is, that would be an indication that the work isn't going to work. Now, is there something on your end blocking the trust that is your work to do? Maybe there's some stuff from your past that hasn't been resolved and you have a wall put up. And if we can resolve that from on your own, self stuff around that, that wall might start to come down a little bit. If your partner is continuing to do their work, of course, maybe, a lot of times we have unresolved resentment and anger that needs to have words put to it, right? So maybe you need for your partner to hear how much you resent all these years of having the wool pulled over your eyes where you thought you were on the same page. And then now you just find out, was that all a lie, right? Maybe you need for them to just hear you say, to just lean into your resentment and hear you say, yeah, I really have some resentment around this. And to hear them say, you know what? Of course you do. Your resentment makes sense to me. Anybody is going to have resentment around something like that, right? And your role in sharing the resentment is going to sound something like, look, I don't want to hold on to this resentment forever. It's not fun for me. I don't just want to randomly beat you up. But at the same time, I want this resentment to resolve. I want it to go away. And it needs to have words to it before it's going to go away. That's where my heart is. So I just need for you to hear it. Your partner might need to have to express their resentment around something too, right? So a lot of times resentment is blocking. If you have done that resentment anger work and you've cleared up that layer and not getting stuck in it, but just being, anger and resentment need to be heard. If they don't get heard, they are probably not going to go away. So if that hasn't happened, that would be my next place to go with that. And yeah, there's so many things to look at before we say, hey, I don't think this is going to get anywhere. But at the end of the day, if the truth is, I cannot re-engage, I am not willing or able to re-engage emotionally and do this emotional work, then we have to say, then the consequence of that is no safety and closeness in the relationship. And that isn't going to be a very fulfilling relationship, whatever you do with that. And, just to validate, your partner might be doing something to block your ability and willingness. But sometimes they can be doing everything perfectly and your body still just isn't able to take it in anymore. And it's not like a conscious choice. It sounds to me like, look, you're going and doing the work, you're trying here. But if your body and nervous system are blocked, we can remove all the blocks possible and still the block is just too much damage happened. And it's not your fault. If there are several past wounds regarding the same issue, partner not showing up fully for my medical and other physical needs, should each wound be addressed in a separate healing conversation, or should they be brought up as a pattern of behavior? Well, first of all, this is very, 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 very common, these medical wounds and hospital wounds and childbirth wounds. To be honest with you, I see more of those kinds of wounds than I see affairs, is these health things, because there's so much on the line. It's like, I need to know you're going to be there for me in my most vulnerable state, when I need you the most, when I'm physically incapacitated. Like, there's so much need and trust around that. And I'm not saying affairs aren't harmful at all. They are. They're equally, or if not worse, harmful, who knows, but they are just not, in my experience, as common. So you don't need to address every single little thing separately for it to heal, but you do need to address it as a separate incident. So the conversation needs to be around one incident, right? The biggest one, the first one that comes to your mind that was so hurtful and harmful for you. And you need to be able to say, look, this is how it hit me. This is how I was impacted. I know you had your own stuff going on, but still I was super, super, super hurt. And it crushed me. And I thought, are you ever going to be there for me when I really need you? And I just need for you to know that and lean into that with me. And if they're able to do that and we relieve the pressure off that event, that's going to help with the whole pattern. Now, you might need to say, look, and these other couple things that happen, they're kind of the same thing. And it was really hard, those events. Right. And I need you to not know about this one big one. That was just the biggest one. But I need you to know that it happened again and again, and it killed me. And so there's a way to kind of roll it all in. It's not like deliberately rolling it all in. It's just coming from this authentic place of this pattern. And here's some examples of how that pattern showed up. Now, if you do that, there's a really good chance that the wound around the whole pattern, especially if the behavior changes, will start to resolve. But you might still have little things come up here and there. If there's a trigger and it doesn't seem like that trigger is going to go away on your own, you can't soothe yourself with it and go, okay, I know that's hard. I'm getting reminded of this event. It's probably not big enough that I need to take it to my partner. I'm just going to kind of draw upon the fact that we have healed around this, and I can reasonably assume that my partner will be able to show up for me, and that can kind of be enough self-soothing, then that's great. But if it's not, and you go, nope, this is not going to go away until I get some help emotionally from my partner around it. I just need to go back there and get a little validation or whatever, just so my nervous system believes that that is real and possible if I reach to them for that. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that I don't really believe that I know every single little episode that represents the wound does not have to be addressed, but enough of them do have to be addressed to, make sure the pattern is being given enough attention. Um, Anxious attachment course comment in chapter 9 question. I'm getting so much value out of your anxious attachment course. Awesome. Thank you so much. I am on section 6 and the timing is perfect. Right now, I am feeling dropped by 2 avoidant male relatives, and I'm feeling the same type of rejection from both of them. In the past, I've felt the same thing with my husband and dad too. They are also avoidant males, of course. With this course, I can see how the tender part in me that feels I can never do enough in order to be enough is being triggered by these avoidant males. With the course exercises, I've been able to see this pattern for the first time and how it shows up all over my life. Through the exercises, I'm starting to give a voice to these feelings, to validate myself like no one has ever validated me, and to soothe this tender part. I'm so happy to hear that. This is exactly why I created it. And I think this is now the question. I got triggered again this weekend and was so thankful to have the course to go to for help. I think, okay. I'm so happy it's starting to become easier for you. That's the whole goal. That's why I repeat the same thing over and over in that course. So question, I think this is an example of a wound. Lately, I have been wanting my avoidant husband to stand up for me, defend my honor to the 2 avoidant male relatives I mentioned at the beginning of my comment. I'm wanting my husband to stand up and say, hey, don't treat my wife in this way. That's not okay. She has done a lot for you and you are rejecting her by not acknowledging her efforts and thanking her. I remember really needing this from my husband one other time in the past. What is this about? Is it reasonable to expect him to defend me in this way? Is it actually my job to find my own voice to defend myself? Well, first of all, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting that at all. I think, yes, I want you to be able to do this on your own, but that doesn't eliminate the goodness that can come from having a partner who can help us with that too. Right now, whether or not your partner is willing or can do that, I don't know. Unfortunately, there's a lot of reasons why they would be able to or would not be able to, but it is not an unreasonable expectation to want that. If you say that to your partner and your partner is able to validate that, but then also to come in and say, though, I don't know if I feel so comfortable doing that. And here's why. I would like to see you be able to lean in that and try to understand where they are with that too, and see if you guys can come up with some sort of solution outside of a negative cycle that works for both of you. But here's how I want that delivered. What you're telling me is that somewhere in your life, in childhood, you didn't get protected. Nobody protected you, right? You had to just kind of on your own deal with these feelings of being rejected and not seen for what your efforts and not thanked, and you just had the negative things thrown at you all the time, and nobody was there to protect you. And children need protection from that. They need people in their life to say, hey, listen, yeah, you're getting this thing wrong, but you're not defined by your failings, and let's work on this. And you need to have adults who are protecting you from the feeling of being rejected, not overprotecting you, but at least helping you out when you do feel that way and reasonably trying to protect you from, feeling emotionally unsafe in the world. And you didn't have that. And of course you're needing that from your husband. And, it's not all his work. Some of it is your work to learn to protect yourself, like you're learning in the course. But what I would say to your husband, or what I would facilitate in a therapy session, I was like, look, nobody protected me, right? My whole life, I've longed to feel like someone was there and going to stand up for me. Yes, I'm learning to stand up for myself. I can do that now. And I'm so grateful that I can do that. But my whole life, I've longed for someone to be able to step up and just say, hey, don't treat my wife like that. And it would mean so much to me if you could help me with that. Would you be willing to do that? Right? That's just one way to get that conversation going with a little more depth and a little more vulnerability and a little more authenticity, and really showing your true self and giving your partner an opportunity to maybe even be the first person who's ever shown up for you and helped you in that way. Okay, usually we talk about a repair from a negative event. I have a wound around the absence of vulnerable verbal appreciation. Do we still use the in order to feel close approach with wanting to move from neutral to positive versus negative to positive? Yes, absolutely. That's going to sound like, "Hey, listen, it's been really hard for me over the years to kind of not, I'm not saying you need to kind of cheerlead me all the time, multiple times a day, but you know, it is nice when our partners recognize what we're getting right. And it is hard when, we don't feel seen for what we're contributing and instead we're just getting a lot of feedback about what we're getting wrong. That's kind of demoralizing for me. And I do need to hear more of the positive is seen in me. I do. That's part of what helps me feel seen for my whole self and that I'm not just kind of defined by my failings in the relationship. I think anybody needs that. And to feel safe and close to you, I do need more of that. And I do need for us to figure out a way to kind of get more of that going in our relationship, in the, service of feeling better. And wouldn't it be nice if I, the consequence of me feeling better is X, Y, and Z, or the outcome of me feeling better is X, Y, and Z. And that's going to help me soften and that's going to help me feel less anxious and stressed. And it's probably going to impact you positively. Wouldn't it be nice if we can get there? Well, here's what I really need for that to happen. Um, you speak about honoring your nervous system and the feelings in your body. Yes. Is it reasonable to have acceptance that your nervous system can respond when it detects danger? And otherwise, I need to have acceptance that I can handle the situation and allow my nervous system to calm down versus remaining on high alert all the time. Yes. I mean, we have to accept reality, right? And reality is that your nervous system is going to respond when it detects danger. There's nothing wrong with that response. The thing that might be wrong is if you're ineffective, is if you handle that response in a way that actually kind of makes things worse for you, right? You're not sitting with it and going, all right, here's that response. Like what is let me just sit with it. Like you said, accept that it's there and allow it to calm down. Sometimes that is the work, right? Just kind of sitting with it and seeing if it peaks and dissipates. And, there's lots of ways to regulate when our nervous systems get activated. One of the ways you're describing is to just kind of sit with it. And in sitting with it, maybe you fear it less. And if you fear it less, it doesn't have to be on alert all the time. But there's also, okay, I typically do not have an anxious attachment with my husband except regarding his toxic family dynamics because there is no emotional safety or closeness. Okay, so I'm not really sure if there's a question in that, but it sounds like the toxic family dynamics are what creates this yucky feeling in your body. And so really what I'm going to be addressing if I'm working with you as a therapist is what causes that yucky feeling to exist? What is that yucky feeling needing? It's needing help from you to regulate it, and it might be needing help from your partner. Maybe your partner has some work to do with you, and you can work together on the toxic family dynamics and kind of stabilize that part that is creating the trigger that maybe he can do some things different to help you, right? But ultimately, we are all responsible, however the trigger gets there, we are all responsible for having the self-work to manage it. And, there's different ways to regulate that. Um, okay, someone says, thank you. You're very welcome. Okay, let's see. Give me 1 second. Okay, let's see if we have. I don't see any hands raised. So, all right. Well, okay, we have Douglas. So we'll go ahead and do Douglas and we'll stop with Douglas. So, Douglas, go ahead and pop on when you're ready.
Okay. Can you hear
Hi,
me okay? Yeah,
I
I was on
can.
camera earlier, but I had to drop for a work meeting that was poorly untimed.
Problem.
So I may have missed a few things. But my question
Okay.
was, and you answered it partially in like slides 7, 8, and 9 of your
Okay.
presentation. So quick backstory. My partner and I, she broke up about 3 months ago because of hurtful words in our ruptures. Um, I understand where they came from. I've done tons of counseling, therapy, all that kind of stuff. We have
Okay.
been we have been talking recently once every 2 or 3 weeks. They're good conversations, they're positive, there's no ruptures, there's mutual validation. And I guess my question is, she hasn't ever really, like you answered part of the question in those slides about what she needs to do, because I was the wounding partner. She said hurtful things to me too, and I understood where
Okay.
they come from her past and her inability to regulate that. I guess I know patience is obviously a big thing. It's like, how do I encourage her to, I guess, show up? I don't know if there's
Mm-hmm.
anything I can do. I sent her a copy of your book. She agreed to read it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we've talked a little bit about that. But I don't know. I'm just like, what do I need to do? Just wait.
Mm-hmm.
I've encouraged her to, let's talk about this more, since we're having these positive validating
Mm-hmm.
conversations. But I didn't know if you had any suggestions.
Okay. What would you like to happen?
Um, well, I want her to, I mean, I've done a lot of work, and I'd
Okay.
like for her to see that I've done a lot of work. I do want to, I think we can be good for each other if we validate, and, because during the relationship, the hurtful words come from, I felt like she didn't appreciate anything I was
Mm-hmm.
doing. And when I would ask for those things, she got defensive. And I understand, because she's got wounds too, and I
Mm-hmm.
understand that. Um, but it's like, how can, I would love to reconcile, because I think we can
Mm-hmm.
be good together. I think there's lots of potential there. We share values and interests
Yeah.
and future plans and all these kind of things. But I know she's hurt.
Mm-hmm. Well,
There was no infidelity. There's no work issues. There's no addiction issues.
sure.
There's none of those what I would call major things. And you know, it's just hurtful words. And
Yeah.
that was the only reason that she broke up with me. So I've
Okay.
addressed that.
And
So
is she interested in trying to go forward?
I'm
Or
not really sure.
you're not really sure?
She
Okay.
hasn't really said no, but she hasn't
Okay.
said yes either. So
Okay.
she has
Well,
acknowledged that things are better.
okay.
But yeah,
Are you, and she knows that you are wanting to go forward. She's clear about that.
absolutely.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I want to avoid, look, you're over here, you're doing the work, you've owned your part, you're changing your part, you're clearly taking action to get better and aren't doing those things anymore. So, I just want to, number one, make sure that, you're not getting kind of strung along,
right.
because she's got her own unresolved work, because she's got to do some work too, because you've said a few things that, yeah, those mean words are not okay. That's not a good way to try to regulate your feelings. But at the same time, those feelings didn't come from nowhere, right? Those mean words are trying to get some sort of need met from her, and they weren't getting met. And it sounds like you were asking and not getting it met. And so I need to understand what she needs to do different on her side of the environment. Like, is she able to see this in the context of a negative cycle? That your mean words are not okay. We do not want to keep going back there. But, like, what was going on my end over here? Is she
Right.
willing to do that?
Yeah, she's acknowledged after I
Okay.
sent you the her or I sent her your book, and when she first started
Okay.
reading it, she did acknowledge that she had her own work to do, but she
Okay.
didn't explain what work that was. I think it was more around validating, because she thought she was validating me, and it's just
Okay.
like, well, if I didn't feel that validation, it's just like, because I think we sometimes we do things that we think are appropriate. But
Yeah.
if your partner
Yeah.
doesn't perceive it that way, then it wasn't in the form that they needed it. And that happened a lot in our relationship. And I just said, I understand you think you're adding things to a relationship, but that's not what I need necessarily.
Hmm.
So just because it's from your perspective doesn't mean it's from my
Yeah.
perspective. And that's what I'm wondering. Like, I don't know what,
Okay.
necessarily what she feels her work needs to be.
All
So,
right. Well, we do know this. We know that she's not re-engaging in the way that you would want, right? And it doesn't sound like,
and I'm trying to be patient. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And you are being patient. 3 months is patient, and maybe you need to be more patient and let more, like I said to you last time, I think more positive experiences build up between the two of you to keep building up that trust. Um, but I don't, the biggest question is what's her block? That's
Okay.
the $1 million question is we need to know what her block is to going forward. What's the fear? If I go forward, what bad thing might happen, right? I don't know what that is now that you're doing this, she has kind of an avoidant attachment style. Now that you're doing all this work, is something going to be asked of her emotionally that she won't know how to give you? Is she afraid this behavior will still keep happening? I don't know what it is, but we need to she's got to be clear about that, and you've got to be clear about that at some point, maybe not right now, but eventually, because, if you guys aren't aware of whatever the block is, it's impossible to kind of try to work through it.
Right. Yeah, I kind of had that in a different way. Like if we did talk again and there was some resistance, like just try to understand, like, yeah, what is that fear? What is that block?
Yeah.
Because I really don't know other than you feel there's going to be another rupture or, I'm just assuming those are things, but is there something deeper there that she's not explicitly, said that
Right.
I do want to understand that. So.
Right. She might not know. And the problem here is that if you're over here doing all this work and you're really trying to get down to the bottom of some of this stuff and she's not able to join you in that for whatever reason, that is going to potentially create some problems, right? And even if you do get back together, and so that's a side note, but I think the thing I'm trying to say ultimately is like she really does need to be doing her work, even so she can just communicate to you clearly about where she's at, right? Like you're not getting clear signals, you're not getting clear messages. Again, there's lots of value in being patient, but I don't want you to have to be impatient indefinitely with like not really knowing what's happening. And so the first thing I would do when you said, trying to get a little bit more clear about her fears is also really leaning into that and validating. It makes so much
Absolutely.
sense to me that you're scared. But then we got to follow that up with, at the same time, here's how I'm impacted. If I don't know what's going on. I want to be together with you. I don't want to waste any more time. We have all these strengths, but, I feel that I, kind of deserve to have a little more clarity about where you are. Like you have the right to advocate for some clarity. And maybe
Right.
that clarity is, I just don't know right now, right? And at least that's her verbalizing, right? And you do have, it's healthy to expect communication around where she's at.
Yeah, and that's a consistent theme in our relationship, and I've tried to
Hmm.
respect it because she's a lot of times says, "I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that."
Yeah.
She needs to process it or whatever. But a lot of times it never got resolved or she never came
Yeah.
back to me. And then when I bring it up again, she got defensive or, and it just
Hmm.
contributed to those ruptures. So,
Okay, so
um,
now we have to reasonably assume that if she's not doing her work, right? You can get to the point, probably pretty easily. You're doing the work. You can get to the point where you're not handling those triggers when she's not, opening up to you by saying mean words, but that's not going to make those triggers go away. Part of the triggers going away is her learning how to emotionally engage with you.
right.
So I can give you all, you can do all the, new skills possible. And there's so much value in that. But at some point, we have to figure out what's keeping her from emotionally engaging enough in the relationship for it to be okay for you, for
Right.
closeness to be established and safety to be established.
Okay.
So my
Okay.
biggest concern, I guess, if I were to summarize this, is she doing the work too? Because it really has to happen.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's and her lack of work is showing up right now in the cycle you guys are in right now, even though you're not together, where you're over here feeling anxious and nervous and left in the dark, and she's over here, not really being clear with you.
yeah, I need to understand what her fear and block
Yeah.
is because and, you know, I do want to understand that because she's had lots of um, failed relationships.
Yep.
And I want to believe, she always says her picker was bad. And it's like, well, I want to
Mhm.
believe that, but I need to understand. I can't
All right.
help
So say,
contribute to it without
yeah.
understanding what her true fear is and her block is. So,
In saying her picker was bad, there's probably truth to that, but also there's stuff going on with her that caused her picker to not be so great,
right,
right? And that needs to be owned and seen so we can work through it and heal it, and it have to not keep repeating in her relationships going forward.
right, right.
And I was going to say one more thing. Yeah, I can't remember. Okay,
That's a
good luck.
no.
Keep
I
us
appreciate.
posted.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I appreciate
Okay.
everything you're doing with these book things. Are great.
Well, you are very welcome. Thanks for always being here and participating.
It's,
All right. So I'm going to answer two more here. When you posted on Facebook that emotions take about 90 seconds if you can just sit with them. Can you expand on that? Yes. So an emotion is not meant to last forever in your body. It's meant to rise up, give you some information, bring your attention to something, and then fizzle away. And that is not my 90-second is not my words. It's a Harvard study that was done that when they had a lot of people come in and observed how their emotions worked, what they found is that it takes an average of 90 seconds for an emotion to peak and dissipate. So the problem is with that process is when people get in the way of it peaking, and people get in the way of it all the time. That's what called defending against our feelings is when we get in the way of the feeling existing. And we can get in the way by going into our head. We can get in the way by reacting and just starting to protest or yell at someone. There's all these ways that we can get in the way. It's usually some sort of behavior that is meant to numb the feeling instead of just letting it be. Now, there's also some other factors there. One is sometimes people have so much trauma around their feelings that when they start to feel, they start to panic because they're starting to feel, and the panic now becomes a new emotion. And then things can get sort of convoluted. And then we have another situation where feelings are coming rapid fire, and it's like your feelings will follow thoughts, right? So if you're sitting there trying to sit through a feeling and you've got all these thoughts spinning around, then all these feelings are coming with all the spinning thoughts, and it starts to become so much emotion that it's too much to manage. So, yes, learning to sit with a feeling, if you can do it, and many people can learn to do it, tap into your body, really focus on it, feel it. It will take about 90 seconds for it to peak and dissipate. However, some people are going to have blocks, and they have to learn how to do that to begin with. And one of those ways of learning is to, one of those ways to learning is to learn how to get out of your head and back into your body, have the body awareness to begin with. And then the other thing is we have to look at any kind of trauma that might be blocking a person from actually just sitting with their feelings. And I'm not sure if I'm answering that because when you say expand on it, that could mean different things. So I'm not sure what you mean by expand on it, but maybe what you mean is how do you do it? So what you do is you have to first figure out where the feeling is in your body, right? And you said earlier that it sounded like from your question earlier, you do have some nervous system awareness. So we need to find like, okay, where is that that nervous system, feeling manifesting in your body? Is your chest tightening? Or your arms tightening? And if you put the focus there, now your focus is going into the physical sensation of the feeling instead of going into thoughts that are trying to make sense of the feeling. So you just want to stick with that bodily thing and just keep your focus there. If you feel a tightness in your chest, keep your focus on that tightness. Let it get big. Let it get as bad as possible. Some people say actively try to make it worse, simply because if you're trying to make something worse, you can't not be creating space for it. So try to just focus on it and just give it some time and see if it gets to the the baddest worst place, and then it should start to kind of taper out. And it's really good for your nervous system to do that, because that energy doesn't get stuck. And then at the end of that, you can allow that to happen. You should have a moment of clarity and feel calmer and more clear. And then you go back and you go, all right, what am I needing to do with this here? I don't want to have to keep having this feeling come haunt me over and over. What am I needing to get healing around this? And that's where the course comes in, is to not just help you have the feeling, but to also start to understand and learn more about what that feeling is needing to actually heal. All right, we will go ahead and stop there. Thank you guys for joining, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week for chapter 10. All right, bye-bye.